Hi, so let's pick up the pieces where we're at. In the year 70, the temple was destroyed by the Romans. And the rabbis had to figure out, where do we go from here? What do we do? Judaism had been totally based on the Torah and on the temple and on sacrifices. In the course of the next decades, the rabbis began to put together the notion of a synagogue. They began to create prayer as we now know it. The Amidah prayer became central. So what we find is that the key rabbi in this transition in the year 70 was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And we're going to find that about the year 200, he was around the year 70, around the year 200, we're putting together a new Judaism that's based on the Mishnah, the teachings of the rabbis, mostly around ritual items. But we also find that of the 63 books in the Mishnah, one of them, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, deals with ethical, moral teachings. And that's what we're studying. So going back to the year 70 and that pivotal character, Yochanan ben Zakkai. Last time we saw that he had 5 main students, and they were Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar. And the question was, what do each of those 5 students bring to the table? What are their great, the things that distinguish them? And which of them was considered the greatest of all? And we saw last time that of these 5 students, it seems to come down to either Rabbi Eliezer, who was known for photographic memory, was known for carrying the tradition that he received and not changing it one bit, not losing a drop. And on the other hand, Rabbi Elazar, names sound very similar, Rabbi Elazar, who we say of him that he was so creative. He was more forward-looking and willing to change things than Rabbi Eliezer was. So we now come to the following thing. We're told that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his 5 students, go out, u're'u ezohi derech tova sheyidbak ba ha'adam. Go out and figure out which is the best path for a person to follow, to cleave to in their lives. What's the one quality or characteristic? So of the 5 students, you're going to get 5 different answers. Rabbi Eliezer says, ayin tova, literally a good eye. But the idea of ayin tova means that you're generous, not only in what you give, but in how you evaluate people, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Rabbi Yehoshua says, you know what the best quality is? To be a chaver tov, to be a good friend. Let's assume that people don't have, like on Facebook, thousands of friends. You've got 1 or 2. And to be truly a good friend, that's the ultimate thing that you want to be in life. So we might think for a moment, what does that mean to be a good friend? Well, you're there for people to celebrate with them when good stuff happens, and you're not jealous of them. You can feel their joy and you're happy for them. It also means in sad times, you're there for them to give them the support that they need. We might also say that to be a chaver tov, to be a good friend, means that sometimes you have to challenge the person that you care about. It shouldn't just be that Whatever you say, I'm behind you. Sometimes maybe to be a good friend, you have to say, I think you're making a big mistake, and here's why. You want to reconsider this. So that's what Rabbi Yehoshua says. The third rabbi, the third disciple of Yochanan ben Zakkai, says, it's Rabbi Yossi, and he says, the most important thing you want to be in life is a shachen tov, a good neighbor. How's that different from a good friend? You might only have one or two really good friends. You might have dozens of neighbors. You live in a high-rise, you might have thousands of neighbors. And the idea is that you need to, not to be their best friend, but to somebody knocks on the door, can I borrow a cup of sugar? That's in the easiest way. But maybe when we see that something's happening at the house or the apartment next door, we have to step in and we have to help them, even if they're not our best friend. So that's what Rabbi Yossi says. Rabbi Shimon says, Haro'eh et hanolad. That, you know what the most important quality you need in life? To be able to see that which is not yet born. Haro'eh et hanolad. What does he mean by that? I think he's saying that you have to figure out consequences of things that you do before you do them. If you can, now look, none of us can predict the future. We're not prophets. And yet, if we can perhaps think through not just what looks good right now, but go to the next step and say, what might happen because of this? Think about kids in middle school, right? How many times has this happened? That somebody is getting a drink of water from the fountain, and somebody thinks, you know, it would be really funny, while their head is down, slurping up the water, I'm going to push the back of their head, and the water, instead of going into their mouth, is going to squirt them in the eyes and in the face. Won't that be funny? Well, somebody who follows Rabbi Shimon's teaching to see what is not yet born might say, you know what? Suppose it's just not the water that goes in their eyes. Suppose you push their head down and they bang their teeth into the metal of the water fountain and break their teeth, right? So it's that kind of, in a sense, defensive driving. You know, we're taught you always have to anticipate a guy, a car, somebody who's going to do something totally unexpected. If you put your guard down, you may not be ready for it. But if you're a good driver, you ro'eh et hanolad. You see what's possibly coming even before it happens. The fifth rabbi, Rabbi Elazar, says, Lev Tov, a good heart. You want to know what you should have in order to get through life? The best quality, it is to have a good heart. So the teacher, having asked the students, tell me what you think the number one value should be. Here's the 5 answers, and he says, Amar lahem, he said to them, Ro'eh ani et divrei Elazar ben Arach. I see the words of Rabbi Elazar, the 5th rabbi, who said, Lev Tov, a good heart, shebichlal devarav divreichem, that everything else that you said would be covered. If you have a good heart, then you're certainly going to be generous towards other people. You're going to be a good friend. You're going to be a good neighbor. If you have a good heart, you're going to think through the consequences of your actions before you do them. This is interesting because here Rabbi Yochanan, of the 5 students, picks the last one. And last week, the question was, of the 5 students and their qualities, who would be the top student? And there was a debate, a difference of opinion. Some said that Rabbi Yochanan would have picked Rabbi Eliezer. He was the man who said, you know what, he never lost anything that he learned. He always looked back to what was handed down, the tradition that was given to him. Other people said, no, I think that Rabbi Yochanan, he would have appreciated Rabbi Elazar, the creativity. And we don't really know which answer was right. But here, when the rabbi asks his 5 students, and when we hear the answers, and Rabbi Yochanan picks the 5th rabbi, Rabbi Elazar, the one who was the creative one, not the conservative one to hold on to traditions. Rabbi Yochanan says it's Rabbi Elazar whose ideas were the best. Next Mishnah, the next teaching goes like this. Seems like a simple question, maybe not so simple. Amar lahem, he said to them, Tze'u, now I want you to go out, Ur'u, and see, Ezo hi derech ra'ah, what's the worst quality that a person might have, she'yitrachek mimena ha'adam, that you should stay far away from, okay? In a sense, is it just the opposite side of the coin from the first question? Tell me the best quality, now tell me the worst quality. Well, some of the rabbis are just going to give the flip of, they want easy homework. So they just give the flip of what they previously said. Rabbi Eliezer says, ayin ra'ah. You know what the worst thing is? It's to have a bad eye. And of course, that means to be begrudging. It means to be stingy. It means never to give people the benefit of the doubt, always suspect them of the worst. Okay? So he goes from a good eye to a bad eye. Those are the 2 qualities you should do, you shouldn't do. Rabbi Yehoshua, similarly, he says, I told you before, the best quality is to be a good friend. Now I'm going to tell you the worst quality is a chaver ra, to be a bad friend. You know, somebody who claims to be there for people you call friend, but when you're really needed or when it really gets tough, you're not there. You're nowhere to be seen. Similarly, Rabbi Yassi says, before he told us, be a good neighbor. Now he says the worst quality is to be a shachen ra, a bad neighbor. 4th guy, Rabbi Shimon Omer, he says, Halovet, he comes up with a different answer. Halovet v'eino mishalem. He said, you know what the worst thing is? It's to borrow and not to repay. That's sort of very strange. Where does that come from? And you know, somebody lends you money and you don't pay them back. It's not a good quality, but that's the worst quality in the world. And then we have in parentheses whether it was Rabbi Shimon said it or maybe the editor added to so we could be clear. Echad haloveh min ha'adam. And it's all the same whether you borrow from another person, kiloveh min hamakom, or whether you borrow from God. God is called hamakom, the place. Just like when we, at a Shiva visit or at the cemetery, when we leave after the burial, we say hamakom yinachem etchem. May God, literally it's translated as the one who is in every place. So here we're told it's all the same whether you don't pay back another person who lent you something or God. Now, this is an interesting question. How do you pay back God? And what is it that God lent us? I mean, we would assume God gives us gifts. They're ours. But here it says that God will lend us things, and not to repay God is considered the worst quality. Well, maybe it's to realize that life itself is a wonderful gift, and if we don't pay that gift back or pay it forward in some way, helping somebody else, if we've been blessed financially, we don't pay God back necessarily, but we pay it forward by giving to tzedakah or helping other people out. Okay, there are those that would say that when God gave us our bodies, those bodies are not ours. They are on loan from God. And therefore, we need to take care of them. Some people say that's the reason we're not allowed to get tattoos. It's not our body. It's a gift from God, and we need to return it ultimately to God the same way that God gave it to us in a pristine kind of state. And Rabbi Shimon, in bringing this answer, the worst thing you could do is not pay somebody back who gave you something. He quotes a verse, and he tells us the following: Shene Emar, Loveh Rasha velo Yishalem. A wicked person borrows and he doesn't repay. V'tzadik chonein v'notein. But a righteous person will be gracious and will give. Right? That notion of you were given a great blessing, pay it forward. Somebody did a favor for you, pay it forward. Don't keep it to yourself. So that's the lesson there. Now we have the fifth rabbi, Rabbi Elazar, and he's answering the question, what's the worst quality? And his answer is, like his first answer, the flip side, to have a lev ra, to have a bad heart, right? In an ethical sense. And the teacher hears all the answers. Amar lahem, he said to them, Ro'er ani, I see et divrei Elazar ben Arach, the words of the fifth rabbi, Elazar, as being the best answer. Shebechlal devarav, because all of your answers are found in his answer. In other words, if you have a bad heart, then you'll be grudging, you'll be a bad friend, a bad neighbor, you won't repay people. So ultimately, what we learned from this little homework assignment was best thing you should do is have a good heart. And the worst thing you could do is to have a bad heart when it comes to how you deal with other people. So now, having tested the students, now we put each of them on their own, and we find out that each of these five rabbis, it says, Heim Amru Shlosha Devarim. They each said three things. And as we've said before, originally the Mishnah was an oral text, wasn't written down, had to be memorized. And because of that, each sentence, each teaching is as succinct as possible so you could remember it. And often in a series, there's going to be three. We see over and over again lists of three, because three is an easy number to remember. If it's more than that, sometimes it's hard. So we're going to go through the five rabbis. Each of them said three teachings, or were known for these three teachings. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yehi Chavod, may the honor of Chaverach, of your friend, be Chaviv Alecha, as dear to you as your own. Okay? Of all the things that he could say, he's telling us, make sure that you care about, you look after the honor of your friend. Okay? Then he says, Ve'al tehi noach lichos. Don't be quick to get angry. And the third thing is, he says, Veshuv, repent, Yom echad lifnei mitatach. Repent one day before you die. And of course, the obvious question is, well, how do I know the day before I die? And the answer is, you don't. Always assume tomorrow might be that day. Therefore, you should repent today. Don't put things off till tomorrow. You never know if there's going to be a tomorrow. So sort of cleverly, repent, return, do the right thing, make amends, reconcile with people, say what needs to be said now, not some other time in the future. Then there's a parentheses here, because he's just told us three things, but now we see something else. So if, everybody was being told you can bring three things, and he says, no, I got to tell you a fourth, or maybe somebody else, the editor, said, oh, I remember he said something else, and we just got to put that in. So here's the fourth thing of the three things that Rabbi Eliezer says. Havei mitchamein, you should warm yourself. Keneged uran, by the fire or by the heat, the light of shel chachamim, of the wise. Here he means the rabbis. Vehevei zahir, but you better be careful. Begachalatan, you better be careful about their coals. So imagine somebody's close to a fireplace and you've got all these coals that are bringing warmth and light on a very cold day. And Rabbi Eliezer says, be careful. You should go close and warm yourself, but look out, because if you get too close, you're going to get burned. Okay, and he says, "Shelo tikaveh," so you don't, make sure you don't get burned. And then he switches metaphors, and he says, "She nechishatan," their bite, the bite of the teacher, of the professor, of the rabbi, is nishichat shu'al, is like the bite of a fox. And then he says, "The akitzatan," and their sting is akitzat akrav, is like the sting of a scorpion. Ulechishatan, and their hissing is the lichishat of a saraf, it's the hiss of a snake, of a serpent. Right? V'chol divreihem kegachalei eish, and all of their words are like these coals of fire. So here he's saying, and he's a rabbi, and he's telling us, be careful of rabbis. He said, you got to go close in order to learn, but if you get too close, you could get burned. Now, we need to say a word about Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was an incredibly brilliant man. He wasn't necessarily a humble man. And when he thought he was right, he stuck to his guns and he didn't give in. And it didn't matter who else said what. So there's a very famous story about all the rabbis, including Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Joshua, who was among them. And they were dealing with an important question of Jewish ritual law. And Rabbi Eliezer said, here's the answer. And everybody else said, no, we don't think you're right. We disagree. We come up with something else. And famously, Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, let that tree right outside prove me right. And as they look out the window, the tree moves 50 yards. They can't believe it. He said, now do you believe me? And Rabbi Yoshua says, we don't listen to trees telling us what to do. He said, if I'm right, let the water flow backwards. They look outside at the stream. All of a sudden, the water stops, turns backwards, and goes the other way. Rabbi Joshua says, we don't listen to streams. Walls of this building collapse in upon all of us. The walls start to collapse in. And Rabbi Joshua says, when rabbis are having a discussion, what business it is of yours who's right or wrong? So on the one hand, the bricks began to cave in, collapse. But all of a sudden, because of Rabbi Yehoshua, they stopped. And according to the Talmud, you could go to that building to this very day. It would be like a leaning tower of Pisa. It started to fall, but stopped midway. So finally, Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, may God say that I'm right. And all of a sudden, there's a voice from the heavens that says, what are you bothering him for? He's right. I'm telling you, Rabbi Eliezer is correct in this case. And at that point, one of the most audacious and important statements of rabbinic Judaism, Rabbi Joshua looks to the sky and he says, Lo bashamayim, it's not in the heaven. You, God, you gave us the Torah. It's up to us to decide what we think is right or wrong. We don't wait for God to tell us on a daily basis, do this, don't do that. You put it in our hands. We're going to make our own decisions. We vote by majority. The majority says we're doing this. Doesn't matter what the tree, the stream, the walls, what God says. We're going to do what we think is right. The postscript to that story is that somebody later, according to the legend, met Elijah the prophet and said, you were up in heaven when this argument went on. Was God upset when Rabbi Yehoshua refused to listen to him, that Rabbi Eliezer was right? And Elijah the prophet tells them, he says, you know what? God smiled and he said, my children have taken over from me. And he was happy about it. So later, because Rabbi Eliezer had that notion, I'm right, I know I'm right, I don't want to listen to anybody else. Later, the rabbis came and they excommunicated him. What that basically meant was nobody would talk to him, nobody would go and learn with him, nobody would pray with him, nobody would have anything to do with him. That he was brilliant, everybody understood that, but you couldn't get along with him. And so what we find is that maybe Rabbi Eliezer, when he says, on the first hand, the honor of your friend should be as dear to you as your own. Maybe he was criticizing the other rabbis who wouldn't listen to him and who ultimately decided to excommunicate him because he was so strong-willed about this. But then he said, in the second thing, don't be so quick to get angry. Maybe he was reprimanding himself. I shouldn't have gotten angry because they were doing what they thought was right. And then the third element, remember, was repent one day before your death. Maybe he was talking to himself. And maybe he was saying, I flew off the handle. I got angry at these guys. You know what? I'm sorry. And I need to go to them and to apologize for not accepting majority rule when it came to this particular issue. But we also see, in this fourth statement that seems to be added, his notion of saying, basically, you got to be careful of the rabbis because they're like foxes, they're like scorpions, they're like snakes, right? And if they hurt you, believe me, you're going to suffer as I have suffered. So it's hard to know. On the one hand, does he feel bad about what happened and what he did? On the other hand, is he still angry about what happened and what the other rabbis did to him? So we're left with that puzzle to figure out. So then we move on to Rabbi number 2, Rabbi Yehoshua, who says 3 things. Ayin hara, a begrudging eye. The Yetzer hara, the evil impulse. Yetzer hara could be the aspect of selfishness within ourselves. I'm going to do what I want now. I don't care about anybody else. That's Yetzer hara. If it feels good, do it. That's Yetzer hara. So a bad eye, an evil inclination, v'sinat habriot, and hatred of people, hating people, motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam, gets a person, takes a person out of the world. Okay, so what does he mean by this last thing? That you do certain things, if you go around begrudging everybody anything, if you always follow your libido, your lusts, and you don't care about right or wrong, just do what you want on the spot, and if you hate other people, that's those three things, any one of them, it's liable to get you killed. You're going to get people angry at you, maybe so angry they're going to do you harm. Or is Rabbi Yehoshua speaking not in the sense of what other people might do to you, but when Judgment Day comes, be it Yom Kippur or be it when you're at the pearly gates, that ultimately when God looks at you and if he sees these three things, this is somebody who was never generous, somebody who did whatever he wanted to do without thinking about anybody else, and somebody who didn't like people and let them know about it. No, you don't get in. You don't come here. You go to the other place, kind of thing. One thing needs to be told about Rabbi Yehoshua. We remember that when his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was talking about the 5 students, the thing that he praised Rabbi Yehoshua for was Ashrei Yoladeto. Happy is the woman who gave birth to such a man. In other words, his mother loved him. He was the kind of a guy that a mother would really love. Okay? One of the things we learn in the stories about Rabbi Yehoshua is that he was incredibly ugly. That people were often taken aback looking at him, his face, and how ugly he presented. And a lot of times people they weren't kind. Maybe they even said things to him. So here we find out what's his teaching. The notion of if I spend my life being angry and hating people for what they've said to me, how they look at me, I'm going to get nowhere. That's going to consume my life. And maybe he's also giving advice to some of those people who bullied him and who were so cruel to him. The notion of don't look at me with a bad eye. Look at my heart, not at my face. And Yetzer Hara, when you say, this guy's worthless, this guy's nothing. I can do whatever I want to him. Or the notion of hating any individual because of who they are, the way they look. That's going to not go well with God. So with all of these teachings, it's always fascinating to say, are they giving wisdom to somebody else? Or is this an attempt to try to understand themselves and their own weaknesses? And are they trying to teach themselves a lesson? Here's what I wasn't good at. Here's what I need to work on. That very well could be the answer. Third rabbi of the 5, Rabbi Yossi, who we remember was a Kohen. Right? Originally, he probably in his younger days probably served as a priest in the temple. Temple was destroyed. He becomes a rabbi, a teacher. He says the following things. Yehi mamon chaverach. May the money or the property of your friend be chaviv alecha, be as dear to you kishelach, as your own. It's fascinating because you'll remember Rabbi Eliezer said, Yechi chevo chaverach, May the honor of your friend be chaviv alecha, be as dear to you, kishalach. Now, Rabbi Yossi is saying, I'm not sure the issue is somebody else's honor. The issue is somebody else's property. Okay? He's saying, don't worry so much about whether somebody's honor, you're going to offend them. You don't know what they're thinking or feeling. But you always know you can respect somebody else's property. You don't know when you impose on somebody else's honor, but you always know when you've mistreated or stolen or disregarded or disrespected somebody else's property. I'm wondering, is it possible that Rabbi Yossi, who was a Kohen, maybe because people were always bringing him meat and food and gifts as a Kohen, that was part of what his job was. He was more attuned to the notion of physical things, whereas Rabbi Eliezer, who was really the man who was studying and never forgot anything that he learned, he was more concerned about not physical, but about other kinds of things, ethereal wealth, about somebody's respect. So, number one, make sure you treat other people's property appropriately. Number two, v'hatkein atzmach, prepare yourself lilmod Torah. You have to prepare to study Torah. You can't just open a book. You can't just open your ears and it'll come to you. Torah is something that requires a lot of preparation and a lot of hard work. And he says, she'ena, because it's not Yerusha lach. It's not an inheritance. It doesn't simply come to you free. That you want Torah, you got to work at it. Whether it's to learn the Hebrew, that's hard, or whether it's to learn the difficult concepts, that's hard. Okay? And then the third thing that Rabbi Yossi says is, V'chol ma'asecha, let all of the thing, whatever you do, you l'shem shamayim, let it be for, in the name of heaven. Let it be for the sake of God. Okay, and if you live your life that way, that whatever you do is l'shem shamayim. Even in business, realizing that if I cheat somebody, and people are going to look at me and say, this is what your Jewish religion is all about. This is what you learned from your Judaism. Or imagine if on a crowded subway, there's a pregnant woman, an elderly woman, and you've got somebody with a yarmulke and tzitzis, and they've got a seat, and they've got their books or their bags on the seat next to them, and with their yarmulke, with their tzitzis, and here's a pregnant lady and an older woman, and they don't have a seat. They have to stand. What does that do? So at all times, you should say, whatever I do, people are looking, people are judging, and I'm representing not only me, but I'm representing not only my religion and my people, but I'm representing God as well. So we now come to the fourth rabbi of the 5 students, and we're told the following. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Hevei Zahir, be very careful, Kriyat Shema uvet Tfilah. Be careful when you recite the Shema and when you, literally the word is, and when you do the prayer, the prayer. The prayer is understood to be the Amidah. We know that the Amidah was written in the decades after the destruction of the temple. The rabbis had to have people do something. The Shema had already been recited by people when they brought sacrifices to the temple. But now there was no longer a temple. We still have the Shema. We need something more. And what they created, maybe around the year 90, maybe around 100, they created the Amida, the structure of the Amida, the most important prayer as we now have it. So Rabbi Shimon says, you should be careful when you recite the Shema and the Amida. Right? Why? What do you need to be careful about? Ukshe'ata mipalel, and when you pray, al ta'as tfilatcha, don't let your prayer become keva. Don't make it a prescribed routine. Don't make it fixed. There's too many people who say, okay, I got a daven. And what does daven mean? Daven means you say all the words. Doesn't matter how fast you say them. Doesn't matter what you're thinking or feeling. What matters is only, did I say all the words that needed to be said? I've checked the list. And Rabbi Shimon is telling us that's not what prayer is about, right? Ella, rather, it should be rachamim. It should be a sense of mercy, v'tachanunim, and a sense of grace or of pleading lifnei hamakom, before God. Prayer, you need to feel it. It's not just what you say. It's what you're thinking. It's what you're feeling. And if you simply go through the prayers by davening the words without realizing what the words mean, and they don't touch your heart, and you're not connecting with God, you've wasted your time. So he says, be careful, right? Because they've now, before, all you had to do was bring a sheep to the temple, you fulfilled your obligation. But now, when there isn't sacrifices anymore, what you need to do is open yourself to God. And he too quotes a verse. He quotes from the prophet Joel, and he reads as follows, Ki chanun v'rachum hu, because God is gracious and merciful, erech apayim v'rav chesed, he is patient, he is kind, v'nicham al hara'ah, and he takes pity on people who do bad. But you need to feel what you're saying for God to be able to forgive you. God's not going to say, okay, he said all the words, I'm going to give him a good deal. No, you feel them, then God is moved by your feelings. Va'al tehi rasha bifnei atzma. Fascinating line. He tells us, don't regard yourself as evil. Don't be a rasha, a wicked person in your own mind. So many people beat themselves up and say, I'm no good, I'm not right, I'm not kind, I'm not this, I'm not that. He's telling us, don't worry about that. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You remember, we've already learned about Hillel, who said, you know what, if you're not going to stand up for yourself, you're not going to be behind yourself, don't expect anybody else to. So don't beat yourself up. Don't put yourself down. Finally, we come to the fifth of the five rabbis, of the students of Rabbi Yochanan, and it's Rabbi Elazar. You'll remember Elazar was the one who was credited with being so creative and so forward-looking at this time of crisis. And it was Rabbi Elazar who, when asked what's the best and the worst thing you could be or, in life, he said, Lev Tov and a Lev Ra, a good heart or a bad heart. Those are the main things. So let's see what that fifth rabbi, what his teachings are. Havei shakud lilmod Torah. Be diligent when you learn Torah. In other words, not only, as many of the other rabbis have already said, not only do you need to work at it, make it a fixed thing, not when I get around to it, I might open up a book and learn something. No, it's got to be something that's you do constantly, and it's got to be something that you work hard at. So that's number one. Number two is he tells us, V'da ma shetashiv, know what to answer, la epikoros. The word apikoros comes from the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who lived 3rd, 4th century BCE. And of course, the whole Epicurean movement comes out of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. The rabbis living in the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century in the land of Israel, were living under Roman culture and Roman occupation. But yet, in many respects, the culture was still the Greek culture. And if we're talking about the year 70, when the Romans destroyed the temple, remember that it was the Greeks who, during the period of the Maccabees, about the year 160 BCE, who brought so much of Hellenism and Greek thought and Greek philosophy into Israel and challenging the Jewish people. And you can imagine today, often when we speak about, an Epicurean, we often mean somebody who's all about pleasure. But from I'm not sure if that's exactly who the philosopher Epicurus was. That's sort of how we understand him. And people understand an Epicurus as somebody doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe you need to follow the laws of the Torah. So he says, Rabbi Elazar says, you should know what you need to respond to an Epicurus. In the yeshiva world, and in the medieval world, and in the modern world, in Yiddish or in the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox world, one of the worst things a Jew could be is Epicurus. It means you're Jewish by birth, but you've rejected Jewish teachings. You've rejected Jewish observance. Most importantly, you've rejected Jewish belief in one God. Rabbi Elazar is saying, you know what? You need to know what to respond. There are going to be Jews. First of all, there's going to be non-Jews who are going to challenge you by saying your Judaism doesn't make sense. Look at our philosophy. But there's going to be a lot of Jews who have bought into that. And they're still going to be Jewish, but they're not going to be Jewish in the way they believe and behave. And so Rabbi Elazar is saying, you need to know what to answer them. They're going to give very persuasive challenges to, there is no God, or it doesn't make any sense to keep kosher, or to observe Shabbos, or to do all these crazy holidays that you do. If you need to know how properly to defend your beliefs and your observances. You can't just say, this is what I do because I'm Jewish. Because if somebody challenges you, and you can't answer the challenge, you may give them all up. He wants you to know how to answer. There are some people who say, but if you learn what he's going to be challenging with you with, that may bring you away from your Judaism. Therefore, the best thing is not to have a computer, not to watch TV, not to go to the movies, not to go to the university, right? There are people Jews, who try to isolate themselves to protect themselves from what's ever out there. Rabbi Elazar says, eventually it's going to sneak in. You have to know what the other people think. You have to know what the other people believe. and you have to be good enough to be able to defend what you believe and to come back with a challenge to what they believe. Then he tells us, V'da lifnei mi ata amel. Know before whom you labor. In other words, always remember we're working for God. Now, whether he's talking to his fellow rabbis and teachers, or whether he's talking to a simple Jew, and he's saying, you know who you work for? It's God. And therefore, you don't answer to your boss, you answer to God. And finally, he says, V'nei manhu, and that boss, he is faithful, who, ba'al malachtacha, he's a faithful boss, sheyishalem lach, who will pay you, sechar pe'ulatach, who will pay you, reward you for all the work and all the labor that you have done. So if the Epicurus is going to say, there is no God, Rabbi Elazar in the end says, there is a boss. You may not see him, but ultimately you're working for him, and know that you can count on getting your paycheck, getting from God the fruits of all the labors that you have done. So those are the Mishnayot that we're studying, and one way or the other, either in person or by live stream, we'll continue next week, same time, at Tuesday at 11. And a reminder, the Wednesday night class, you're all welcome to. That will be tomorrow night at 7:30.